Sir, if you're not shopping, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Elliot Grayson didn't flinch. He just reached into his back pocket and handed her the document with his name on top and one title beneath it, CEO. And in that instant, the entire store went silent because the man she tried to dismiss was the one who owned everything she thought she controlled. Elliot Grayson didn't care for titles. CEO, owner, executive, those words had lost their shine long ago. After nearly 3 decades in business and more than a few battles to show for it, what mattered now wasn't the corner office or the bank balance. It was people, how they treated others when they thought no one important was watching. That's why on a sun-baked Thursday morning in August, Elliot pulled into the far end of a quiet retail plaza in Savannah, Georgia, and stepped out of a dusty green Ford F-150. No logos, no entourage, just him. Jeans, scuffed hiking shoes, and a plain navy t-shirt. His watch was in a drawer at home. His assistant had no idea where he was. And that was exactly how he liked it. He didn't walk through the front doors of Brookwood Home Store like he owned the place, though he did. He walked in like a man looking for a new shower curtain or maybe a set of throw pillows. The glass door gave a little chime as it closed behind him, and the cool rush of air conditioning hit his face. Inside, the smell of clean cotton candles mixed with floor polish. Light instrumental music drifted from a corner speaker. The aisles were organized, neat, clean, almost too clean, like a place where everyone was trying a little too hard to make things look fine. Elliot moved past a shelf of accent lamps and paused near a display of woven area rugs. He bent down to inspect the tag on a patterned runner, listening more than looking. At the front of the store, a cashier was chatting politely with a woman juggling a toddler and a cart full of discounted dishware. Elliot noticed her. Young, black, early 20s, small gold hoop earrings, and a quiet attentiveness in her eyes. Her name tag read Tina. She didn't smile out of obligation, she smiled out of habit. But then came the interruption. "Sir." The voice was firm, directed, tense. Elliot looked up to see a woman heading straight toward him. White, mid-50s. Crisp white blouse, pressed gray slacks, and a face practiced in being obeyed. She held a clipboard like a badge. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, her tone making it clear that help wasn't the real offer on the table. Elliot stood slowly. "Just browsing." "Well, if you're not planning to make a purchase," she said, shifting the clipboard against her chest, "we ask that customers not loiter near the entryway. It's for safety." He raised an eyebrow. "Loitering." She folded her arms. "It's been an issue here. I've had problems at this location before, and I can't allow anyone to hang around without a clear purpose. Store policy." Elliot's voice stayed calm. "I was looking at rugs." Her posture tightened. "I'm sure you were. But like I said, we've had some situations. I have to maintain a certain atmosphere for our paying guests." He studied her face. She never once asked for his name, never asked what he was looking for, never asked anything, really just assumed. "Do you treat every customer this way?" he asked. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she replied, sharper now, her eyes flicking toward the register where Tina had paused mid-scan. "We can't afford to be lax. I have to make judgment calls in real time." "And that judgment call," Elliot said evenly, "was based on what exactly?" Before she could answer, Tina's voice broke the tension. Quiet, careful. "Janet." The manager turned sharply. "Tina, please stay out of this." Tina hesitated. Her eyes were wide, nervous. She looked at Elliot, then back at her boss. Elliot reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small folded document. Clean paper, minimal markings. He held it out without a word. Janet took it with a flick of irritation, then paused. Her eyes moved across the top line, then back again. The blood drained from her face. "Elliot Grayson," she said under her breath. "CEO." He nodded once. She looked up, blinking hard lips parting in slow disbelief. "No one told me you were coming," she stammered. "That was kind of the point," Elliot said. His voice hadn't changed, not louder, not colder, just steady. Behind them, Tina had stopped pretending to work. Another employee, a tall man in a navy apron, had stepped halfway out of the stockroom. Silence moved through the store like a breeze before a storm. Janet straightened her back. "Mr. Grayson, I sincerely apologize. I truly didn't know who you were. I didn't mean to offend you." "You didn't offend me," Elliot said softly. You revealed something. She blinked. Excuse me, how you treat people when you think they don't matter, that's who you really are. Janet's face twisted and she opened her mouth again, but Elliot raised a hand palm out. You're the manager here, right? I am, she said, her voice thinning. Good. I need you to do something for me. Of course. Go wait in the break room. She froze. I beg your pardon. You've made enough decisions for one morning, he said. Let's not add more to the list. Tina's breath caught. The tall man in the apron stepped back into the shadows. Janet didn't move at first. She looked like she'd just been shoved off balance in slow motion. But after a long, cold second, she turned and walked stiffly toward the back hallway. The echo of her heels on tile was the only sound in the store for several moments. When the door closed behind her, Elliot turned toward Tina. You recognized me, didn't you? She nodded slowly. From the packet we got during training. Why didn't you say anything? I wasn't sure if I should. I didn't want to embarrass her. Or you. He tilted his head slightly. But you saw something wrong. Yes, sir. And you paused. That matters. Tina looked down. I should have spoken up. You just did. He walked toward the register, taking in the layout of the store, the lighting, the spacing of the shelves. Everything was clean organized, but something was missing. The warmth. The human part. You've worked here how long? He asked. Just under 6 months. Ever seen anything like that before? Tina hesitated. Not that bad. But, yeah, she makes comments. Talks down to people. Says it's joking, but it never feels like a joke. He nodded, his expression unreadable. You like working here? I want to, she said. But some days, it's hard. Elliot looked toward the break room hallway, then back at her. That's going to change, he said. And with that, he stepped away toward a nearby shelf of bath mats and drawer organizers. He didn't need to say more. Not yet. The real work hadn't started, but the message was clear. He wasn't here to browse rugs. He was here to see the truth. And the truth had just introduced itself, clipboard in hand. Elliot didn't linger near the register after Janet disappeared behind the break room door. He didn't need to. The message had already settled into the air like humidity before a summer storm, silent but heavy, impossible to ignore. He moved with purpose, but without spectacle, glancing at end caps, eyeing employee dynamics, letting his presence be felt not by speaking, but simply by being. A few customers strolled through the aisles, unaware that the man in the blue t-shirt now reorganizing hand towels was the owner of the entire chain. But the staff knew, and that made every glance, every movement carry twice the weight. Tina Holmes stayed behind the counter, pretending to straighten the receipt printer, even though it didn't need straightening. She kept looking toward the back hallway, unsure if she'd done enough or if she'd said too much. Her stomach twisted with that uneasy question employees in toxic workplaces ask themselves too often. Am I going to regret speaking up, Elliot? Meanwhile, drifted toward the seasonal display near aisle 6, where a modest man in his 30s was stacking boxes of scented glass candles with methodical care. His name tag read Brian Keller. He didn't flinch when Elliot approached, but he didn't smile either. He nodded once, respectful but cautious. You, Brian? Elliot asked. Brian nodded again. Warehouse, been here a while. How long's a while? 5 years. Elliot picked up one of the candles, turned it slowly in his hand. That's long enough to know what's been going on behind the curtain. Brian hesitated, looked around. No customers within earshot, just the faint hum of air conditioning and quiet tension. She's made people cry, he said flatly. Not out here. She keeps it off the sales floor. But in the break room in the back office, she gets mean. Not loud, just cutting. Has anyone ever reported her? Elliot asked. Brian gave a small shrug. A few. Nothing happened. We figured HR just sent the complaints right back to her. Elliot nodded slowly. Ever think about quitting? Every other week. Brian returned to his stacking. But I've got a daughter. Rent to pay. So I keep my head down. Stay out of her way. Elliot put the candle back on the shelf. That ends today. Few steps away near the cookware display, Maria Escobar was helping an elderly man pick out a nonstick skillet. Her eyes flicked toward Elliot twice during the interaction, once when she noticed him nearby, and again when the customer walked away. She offered a cautious smile. Can I help you find anything? No, Elliot replied gently, but I'm hoping you can help me understand a few things. Maria blinked. She knew who he was. Everyone did by now. Still, she stood straighter. Depends what you're asking. I'm asking if you felt respected working here. Maria folded her arms, a voice soft but steady. I've worked in stores since I was 19. Grocery retail cleaning. I've had bosses yell before. But Miss Whitlow, she doesn't yell. She cuts you up with fake smiles. Makes you feel small, like you should be grateful for being allowed in the building. Has she said anything directly to you? Maria nodded slowly. She makes fun of my accent sometimes. Says she's joking. I've stopped correcting her. Elliot's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. Why didn't you leave? Because I have 2 kids, Maria said. Because part-time with health benefits is hard to come by. Because I got used to it. That's the worst part, I got used to it. Elliot placed a gentle hand on the shelf edge beside him. You won't have to anymore. Just then the front door swung open with the whoosh of conditioned air. A woman in a sharp royal blue blazer and black slacks stepped in briskly, a leather tote on her shoulder and determination in her stride. She didn't browse, didn't hesitate. She spotted Elliot across the store and walked straight toward him. Elliot, she said, extending a hand. Thanks for calling. Deborah, appreciate you coming so fast. I was in Macon already, she replied. Figured it was worth the drive. He leaned in slightly. Let's do it in the break room. Deborah Singh, regional director for the Southeast Division, followed Elliot toward the back. They moved past curious glances and whispered questions through the hallway lined with staff notices until they reached the break room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Janet sat stiffly at the plastic table, her clipboard in front of her pen, tapping a nervous rhythm against its edge. Her head snapped up when they entered. Miss Singh, she said quickly, standing. I had no idea he was the owner. No one told me. I would have handled things differently if... Deborah raised her hand. Sit down, Janet. Janet blinked, lips still parted, then lowered herself slowly back into the chair. Elliot remained standing, arms relaxed at his sides. Deborah placed her tote on the table and pulled out a slim file. We've had multiple complaints from this location. High turnover, discomfort among staff, allegations of bias. She flipped a page. Until today, none of it was provable. Today, that changed. Janet's mouth opened again. I thought he was... That's the problem, Elliot said calmly. You thought, you assumed. You didn't ask. You didn't listen. You decided who I was based on a t-shirt and a skin tone. It wasn't like that. It's exactly like that, Deborah said, voice sharp now. And the staff saw it. So did customers. She slid a paper across the table. Your resignation. Sign it and you walk out with dignity. Or we proceed with formal dismissal. Your choice. Janet stared at the form like it might catch fire. Her mouth trembled. After everything I've done for this store... Elliot leaned slightly toward her. Sometimes it's not what you do. It's how you do it. And how you treat people while you're doing it. Janet swallowed hard. Then without another word, she picked up the pen and signed. Deborah closed the folder with finality. You'll be escorted out in 5 minutes. Janet stood slowly, her hands trembling, as she gathered her things. Her clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. She walked past Elliot and Deborah without a word. Her heels clicked down the hallway, each step echoing just a little louder than the last, and then silence. Elliot didn't sigh, didn't speak. He just stood there for a moment, taking in the stillness, the cheap chairs, the cluttered bulletin board, the outdated safety posters. He could almost hear the ghosts of whispered humiliations, quiet tears, shut doors. But not anymore. A minute later, he emerged onto the floor. Tina was behind the register again. Brian stood beside a display of utensil holders. Maria was folding dish towels. They all looked at him, unsure what would come next. Elliot stepped toward the counter, eyes calm, voice steady. Tina, he said. Yes, sir. You're now lead cashier, starting today. She froze, her mouth open, then shut. I don't know what to say. You already said it, Elliot replied. You noticed. You cared. That's leadership. She blinked hard, trying not to cry in front of the team. Brian gave her a quiet nod. Maria smiled softly. Elliot turned to the rest of them. We're not done here. This was just the beginning. I want you all to be part of what comes next. And just like that, everything shifted, not with a speech, not with applause, but with quiet resolve. The store wasn't healed yet, but it had finally begun to breathe again. The energy in Brookwood Home Store didn't flip overnight, but that afternoon, as the last of the tension began to drain from the corners of the sales floor, something unspoken settled into place. Elliot Grayson didn't retreat to an office or slip away in a flurry of handshakes. He grabbed a box cutter from the stockroom and joined Brian at the seasonal aisle, breaking down cardboard and resetting shelves that had been left half done in the chaos. Tina adjusted signage at the front end with a new kind of posture, shoulders back, chin up, not because of the title now pinned to her apron, but because someone had seen her and made her feel like she belonged. Maria reorganized throw pillows in aisle 4, humming under her breath, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. Around 3 p.m., Elliot clapped his hands softly to draw everyone in. "Take a few minutes. I want to talk before the next rush," he said. They gathered slowly, Tina, Brian, Maria, and a few others who'd watched from the sidelines all morning. No one spoke. They didn't need to. They were waiting for clarity. Elliot looked at each of them, his voice low and even. What happened today wasn't about one mistake. It wasn't about someone having a bad morning. It was about a pattern that went unchecked for too long, and that stops now. He let the words land. Brian crossed his arms but didn't look away. Tina stood near the register, still wearing that expression halfway between disbelief and gratitude. "From this day forward, things will be different," Elliot continued. "And that difference starts with respect. Not after you've earned it, not if your sales hit target, not if your shift runs smooth. Respect is not a courtesy. It's a condition. If someone can't show it, they can't work here." A silence followed that wasn't fearful. It was cleansing, like someone had finally opened a window. Maria spoke next, her voice soft. "We've stayed quiet for a long time. I think a lot of us didn't think it would change." "I know," Elliot said, "and I understand why. But silence lets the wrong things take root. Eventually, those roots get deep enough to choke the good stuff out. That's how toxic culture starts. It feeds on the quiet." He stepped back slightly. "So we're going to stop being quiet. Starting next week, every employee across all 7 locations will have a private one-on-one session with HR. No supervisors present, no names attached to anything you don't want. Just space to speak. You'll also see a lockbox by the break room, a place for anonymous input. You'll get updates on what's changing and who's responsible for making it happen. No more just deal with it." "That era ends here." Tina raised her hand slightly. "Do we get to ask for things too, like training or—" "I don't know, feedback that isn't sarcastic," Elliot gave a small smile. "Absolutely. Leadership isn't a wall between you and the company. It's supposed to be a bridge. That bridge has been burned in a few places. We're going to rebuild it." Brian nodded quietly. "Can we talk about overtime rules in those sessions? I've had my hours cut at the last minute, then asked to stay late with no warning." "Put it in writing," Elliot replied. "We'll start there." Maria looked down at the neatly arranged pillows and then back at Elliot. "So, are you going to do this at the other stores too?" He nodded. "Already started. This isn't a one-time thing. I walk in unannounced just like today. No clipboard, no title, just eyes and ears. People show you who they are when they think you don't matter. That's when the truth lives." The group fell into a thoughtful pause. Someone in the back cleared their throat. A part-timer named Chelsea, usually quiet and always tucked behind the cleaning supply aisle, finally said something. "Did she know she was hurting us, Janet?" "Did she mean to?" Elliot looked at her, his answer careful. "I don't know, but here's what I do know. When people get used to power without accountability, they stop noticing who they hurt. Sometimes they even convince themselves it's leadership. But leadership without compassion is just control, and we're not doing that anymore." The automatic doors opened behind them. A couple stepped in talking about curtain rods and window sizes. Life resumed, business continued, but the undercurrent of something new flowed beneath it all. That evening after the closing shift, Tina stayed late to finish setting up a new display for storage bins. Brian showed a new hire how to adjust inventory counts on the handheld device. Maria took home the store's new schedule packet, one that finally included bilingual signage and time-off clarity. Elliot didn't leave right away. He stayed behind to walk the floor one last time, checking nothing in particular, just watching the way the building felt now that it wasn't holding its breath. The next day, word began to spread, not through a corporate memo or a PR announcement, but through whispers, through phone calls, screenshots, text chains between cousins and former coworkers. Did you hear what happened at the Savannah store? No, the owner showed up in jeans, got profiled by the manager. She tried to kick him out. She got fired on the spot, didn't even raise his voice. He just handled it. But the part that traveled the farthest wasn't the drama. It was the line, the sentence Elliot had dropped with quiet conviction. Respect is not a courtesy, it's a condition. If you can't show it, you can't work here. It became a motto, a standard, a quiet legend that drifted from one Brookwood store to the next. In Columbia, a manager printed it and taped it to the staff fridge. In Jacksonville, a team lead brought it up in the morning huddle. In Macon, a cashier quoted it after asking a customer to lower their voice toward a fellow employee. It didn't change everything overnight, but it changed enough to matter. Tina began leading team check-ins once a week, giving space for questions and ideas. Brian designed a new shift training checklist that actually made sense. Maria was asked to join the store's community outreach committee, her first time feeling invited to shape something. Elliot didn't post about any of it. No corporate buzzwords. No humble brags on social media. He didn't need the world to see it. He just needed the people in the room to feel it. A few weeks later, when Elliot walked into the Pensacola branch, unannounced wearing that same navy t-shirt and worn jeans, the door swung open before he could even touch it. A young man in a red vest smiled and said, "Morning, Mr. Grayson. Welcome back." Elliot smiled back. "You know who I am," yeah, the kid said. "We all do now." And just like that, it was no longer just a story. It was a culture, a shift, a ripple that started with one quiet man who refused to let power go unchecked, who believed that dignity wasn't something you earned, but something you honored. And for every team member who ever wondered if speaking up mattered, for every quiet employee who thought no one would ever see what they were going through, that ripple said, "You're not invisible anymore." Sometimes the most powerful changes come not from a loud voice, but from quiet truth. In the story of Elliot Grayson, we saw how a man chose humility over ego, observation over confrontation, and humanity over hierarchy. What happened at Brookwood Home Store wasn't just a clash between a CEO and a store manager. It was a revelation of what happens when power goes unchecked and respect is treated like a reward rather than a requirement. The lesson here is simple but profound. How you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you reveals who you really are. Too often we live in a world where appearances speak louder than character and where assumptions are made in split seconds based on skin color, clothing, or perceived status. But dignity is not tied to a title, and leadership isn't measured by who gives orders. It's defined by who listens, who lifts others up, and who chooses integrity even when it would be easier to walk away. Elliot could have fired Janet in front of everyone. He could have embarrassed her just as she tried to embarrass him, but he didn't. Instead, he chose to protect the dignity of the staff, to quietly correct what had been broken, and to model a new kind of leadership, one that holds people accountable while also restoring hope. For employees, the takeaway is this: you deserve to work in a place where you are seen, heard, and respected. If that's not your reality, don't let anyone convince you that silence is the price of keeping your job. For leaders, the advice is even more direct. Power does not make you a leader, character does. Build bridges, not walls. Lead with empathy, not fear. At the end of the day, every workplace is made better or worse by how people treat one another when no one's watching. Elliot didn't need to be recognized to command respect. He gave it first and expected it in return. And that's a principle we should all carry into our homes, our jobs, and our everyday lives.